Picture a young man, 26 years old, sitting on a hard floor with his legs folded up underneath him. He sits like that for 2, maybe 3 hours. Nothing dramatic is happening. He is not hurt. He is not sick. He is just sitting the way people have sat around fires and in doorways for as long as there have been people. And then he stands up, and his foot will not lift. I do not mean it is a little weak, a little clumsy, a little slow. I mean it is gone. 0. He tells it to point the toes toward the sky, to cock the ankle back, and nothing answers. The front of his foot hangs there like a wet sock, and on top of that, the skin has gone numb, quiet, dead to the touch. Now this is a real case. It was written up by doctors and published in the year 2025. And here is the part that ought to stop you cold. Nothing hit him. Nothing tore. He did not fall down the stairs. He was not in a car. No one dropped a piano on his knee. He sat. That is the entire crime. His own 2 legs, folded together against a hard floor, reached quietly inside him and switched off the biggest, thickest nerve in his whole body. A living cable about 2 centimeters across, roughly the width of a coin you could hold between 2 fingers. And it switched off without 1 second of warning. No tingle first. No ache building. No pins and needles to say, hey, maybe move. Silence, and then a dead foot. So I want to treat this like a detective, because that is exactly what it is. We have a victim who is perfectly fine. We have no weapon, no blow, no wound, and we have a leg that stops working. Something in that room committed the act, and I want to find out what and how and why it left no fingerprints. And when we catch it, I promise you, you will never fold your legs on a hard floor quite so carelessly again. Let us start where any good detective starts, at the scene. And the scene in this case is the inside of your own leg. So let me walk you through it, because you cannot solve a crime in a room you have never looked at. Down the back of you, starting deep in the buttock and running down through the back of the thigh, there is a nerve. It is the sciatic nerve, and it is the champion of the whole nervous system. It is the longest single nerve you own and the widest. At its thickest, back there behind the hip, it is about 2 centimeters across. Think of that. Most of your nerves are threads, spider silk, things you would need a magnifying glass to respect. This one you could feel like a pencil if it were laid in your palm. It is a fat, important, hard-working bundle, and it carries the traffic for almost everything below the knee. Now this fat cable does not stay in one piece all the way down. Somewhere back behind the knee, it does what a big river does when it reaches flatter land. It splits. It divides into 2 branches that go off to do 2 different jobs. One branch dives down deep, tucked safely behind the shin bone, running down through the meat of the calf toward the sole of the foot. That one is well protected. It is buried. To get at it, you would have to go through a lot of muscle. A mugger, if you will forgive me, would have a hard time reaching it. But the other branch, the other branch is the one we care about, because the other branch is reckless. It swings around toward the outside of the leg, and it heads for a little knob of bone you can feel for yourself right now. Reach down to the outside of your knee, a bit below the kneecap, on the outer edge, and press. You will feel a hard little bump. That is the head of the fibula, the top of the smaller of the 2 bones in your lower leg. And this second nerve branch, the common peroneal nerve, wraps right around the neck of that bump like a rope going over a pulley. And here is the trouble. Right there where it hugs that bone, the nerve comes up out of the deep and runs shockingly close to the surface. It is right under the skin, under just a thin sheet of tissue and then skin, and behind it, hard bone. There is no cushion. There is no muscle padding it. It is a delicate electrical line pressed between the outside world and a piece of your own skeleton. Everywhere else the body buries its nerves like a careful electrician burying wire behind the wall. But here, at the outside of the knee, the wire runs across the surface, naked, over a knuckle of bone. That is the weak point. That is the unlocked window, and every detective knows the intruder comes in through the unlocked window. And we are not guessing that this is the weak point. The doctors have counted. Of all the ways a single nerve can get pinched anywhere in the leg, this one, This branch at this bone is the most common by far. They call it the most frequent single nerve injury in the leg, and they figure it happens to something like 19 people out of every 100,000. And here is a little clue for later. Tuck it in your pocket. About 9 times out of 10 when it happens on one side only. One leg, not both. Remember that. A good detective files away the odd little details, because the odd little details are usually the whole case. So now we know the scene. We know the victim, that reckless little nerve at the outside of the knee. We know the murder weapon must be pressure of some kind, because sitting is the only thing that happened. So let us bring in our first suspect. And the first suspect is the obvious one. It is the one everybody names right away, the way everybody in the story always accuses the butler first. The obvious suspect is simple squeezing. You crossed your legs, you pressed on the nerve, and you cut off its blood. Like standing on a garden hose. The water cannot get through the hose while your foot is on it, and the nerve cannot get its blood while your leg is on it. Choke off the supply and the thing downstream goes quiet. It is a clean story. It is a satisfying story, and it is even partly true, which is exactly what makes a good suspect dangerous. Because a nerve is a hungry thing. It is not a dead copper wire. It is alive, every millimeter of it, and being alive, it needs a constant delivery of blood, of oxygen, of fuel, every second of every day. And to deliver that, the nerve has its very own little plumbing, tiny blood vessels running inside it and along it. So if squeezing the leg squeezes those little vessels shut, well, there is your motive and your method all at once. And people have actually measured how much of a squeeze it takes. There is a lovely set of experiments where researchers pressed very gently and very carefully on a nerve and watched the blood inside it with their own eyes, and turned up the pressure a little at a time to see what gave way first. And what they found is beautiful, because it does not all fail at once. It fails in stages, like a town losing power grid by grid. The first thing to go is the drainage. The blood that has already done its work in the nerve needs to flow back out, back toward the heart, through the little veins. And those little veins are floppy, low-pressure things, easy to flatten. So they go first. At a pressure of only about 20 to 30 millimeters of mercury, which is a genuinely feeble squeeze, barely more than a firm handshake, the outflow starts to back up. The used blood cannot leave. It sits there, and the nerve begins to get congested, like a sink that will not drain. Turn the pressure up a bit more, to around 40 to 50 millimeters of mercury, and now you start to choke the incoming supply too, the little arteries and the fine capillaries that actually feed the fibers. Now the fresh blood is having trouble getting in at all, and then, when you reach somewhere around 60 to 80 millimeters of mercury, still not a crushing force, not anything like a hammer blow, everything stops. All the blood flow inside the nerve, in and out, shuts down completely. The nerve is now an island, cut off, holding its breath. So there is our first suspect, laid out neat and tidy. You fold your legs, one bone presses the nerve against the other bone, the pressure climbs past that 60 to 80 mark, the blood stops, the nerve starves, the foot goes dead. Case closed. Shake hands, go home. Except a good detective always feels a little itch when the story is too tidy. And there is something about this that itches me, because if all it takes is starving the nerve of blood, then the timing is all wrong. The way this thing is supposed to unfold, and the way it actually unfolded for that young man on the floor, do not match. And when the timing does not match, you have got the wrong suspect, or at least you have not got all of them. So let me show you why our tidy little garden hose cannot be the whole story. Think about what the blood really does inside that nerve, and how fast it can do its damage. When you truly choke off every drop of circulation, the nerve does not just wink out. It fades, and it fades on a schedule. In the first 10 minutes or so, the signals begin to slow. Not stop. Slow. Like traffic thickening on a hot afternoon. Somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour it hits bottom. The worst slowing it is going to reach from starvation alone. And here is the part that ruins our tidy story. 1 hour, 2 hours of pure oxygen starvation, and you get only a little sluggishness in the wire. A slight drag. To get a total, dead, nothing moves block out of starvation by itself, you need 3 to 6 hours of the blood being genuinely, completely stopped. Now look back at our young man on the floor. 2, maybe 3 hours. And when he stood up, it was not a little sluggishness. It was 0. Nothing. His foot hung there like a wet sock. That is not the slow fade of a starving nerve. That is too much, too fast. The garden hose theory predicts a gentle decline over an afternoon. What actually happened was a demolition. So either the timing is a coincidence, which I do not believe, or there is a second thing going on that the blood story cannot see. Something that hits harder and hits quicker than mere hunger. And we already have a fingerprint pointing at it. Go back to those pressure experiments, but this time watch not the blood, watch the signal directly. Squeeze a nerve at 200 millimeters of mercury and the big fast fibers quit after about 23 minutes. Now push the pressure up to 400, double it, and the same fibers quit in about 11 minutes. You cut the time nearly in half just by leaning harder. That is the tell. If the only villain were starvation, more pressure past the shut-off point should not matter. Off is off. A hose pinched shut is not any more shut if you stomp on it, but the nerve does care how hard you press, even after the blood is long gone. Which means the pressure is doing something to the nerve directly, with its own 2 hands, quite apart from strangling its blood supply. The squeeze itself is a weapon. So let us stop staring at the plumbing and open up the wire. Here is the thing that ought to astonish you about a nerve, and almost nobody stops to be astonished by it. That axon is not a copper wire carrying electricity the way the wall carries it to your lamp. It is a tube of salty water, and it makes its signal by pumping charged particles across its own skin. Sodium on the outside, potassium on the inside, held apart by a little molecular machine in the membrane that works all day, every day, burning energy, bailing sodium out and hauling potassium in, like a man in a leaky boat who never gets to rest. That constant labor is what keeps the wire loaded, cocked, ready to fire. The voltage of a resting nerve is not a gift. It is a wage paid every second by that pump. Now squeeze it. Press on that membrane and you jam the machinery. The pump falters. And the moment the pump falters, the careful separation of charge it was holding begins to leak away. The nerve starts to slide toward the middle, toward the flat dead voltage where it can no longer snap off a signal. It goes through a strange little 2-step when you first press, a brief flicker where it actually gets easier to fire, and then the collapse. But the destination is the same. Pressure does not cut the wire. Pressure switches off the pump that makes the wire a wire at all. And once the resting voltage bleeds away, there is nothing left to fire. The gun has no powder, and it gets more beautiful and more fragile the closer you look, because of how these fast nerves are built to be fast. A good motor axon is wrapped in a fatty insulation called myelin, wrapped like tape around a pipe, but not continuously. Every so often the wrapping stops and leaves a tiny bare gap, only 2 or 3 micrometers of exposed membrane, and these gaps come spaced along the fiber every 1 to 3 millimeters. The signal does not crawl along the whole length. It leaps. It jumps from gap to gap, skipping over the insulated stretches, and that leaping is exactly why a myelinated nerve can run at speeds up to about 120 meters per second, while a bare unmyelinated one plods along at maybe half a meter to 3 meters per second. The leaping is the whole trick. It is the difference between a telegraph and a shout across a field. But leaping has a price. All the action, all the actual firing is crammed into those little bare gaps. And when you press hard on the nerve, you can physically deform the insulation right at those gaps, buckle it, wrinkle it, shove it out of place. You do not have to sever anything. You just have to spoil the geometry at the one spot where the signal was supposed to land its jump. Miss the gap, and the leap fails. And so the fastest, most elegant wiring in the leg is undone by the very thing that made it fast, a chain of tiny, vulnerable stepping stones, any one of which a bone can crush. So now I think we have got 2 accomplices. The squeeze strangles the blood, and the squeeze also throttles the pump and mangles the insulation. Good, but a careful detective is never happy for long, and this case has one more thing that does not sit right. There is a rule about how nerves fail, a rule so reliable you can set your watch by it. When you squeeze or starve a nerve, the sensation fibers go first. The ones that carry pain and touch quit before the ones that carry movement. That is not an accident, that is the ordinary order of collapse. The thin sensory lines are more delicate than the thick motor lines. And that rule is the reason your foot warns you. That is what the tingling is. That is what the numbness creeping in is. Your body is supposed to send up a flare, the sensory circuit failing first, saying get up, move you fool, before the motor circuit goes too. It is a smoke alarm wired to trip before the fire reaches the wiring you actually need. So ask the obvious question. Where was this man's alarm? He told the doctors plainly. No tingling, no pins and needles, no heaviness, no warning of any kind. He felt fine, right up until he stood and discovered his foot was already dead. The smoke alarm never went off, and a smoke alarm that never goes off is itself a clue. There is a hint buried in the high-pressure experiments. At ordinary squeezing, the delicate sensory fibers fail first, in the usual polite order. But crank the pressure up brutally high, up around 750 millimeters of mercury, and the order flips. The rule reverses. The failure comes in a different sequence entirely, because now you are not gently starving the nerve, you are mechanically overwhelming it, and mechanical crushing does not obey the same etiquette as slow starvation. So the missing warning is not a mystery anymore. It is testimony. It tells us this was not a gentle squeeze that built up over the afternoon and gave fair notice. It was hard enough and mechanical enough to skip the warning stage altogether. The absence of the alarm is proof that the pressure, not the starvation, was the ringleader. And now, at last, I can name the culprit properly, and the surprise is that somebody named it a very long time ago. Back in 1949, in a plain medical journal out of California, a physician named Isidore Weiss wrote up a handful of these cases under a title as blunt as a hammer. Cross-leg palsy. And Weiss saw the whole thing that our two red herrings kept dancing around. He said it is not one mechanism. It is two, working together. There is the direct pressure, the bone of one leg driving the nerve against the bone of the other, pinning it to the fibula. And there is stretch. When you fold that leg up and over, you also pull the nerve taut, you stretch it over that bony corner like a rope hauled hard around the edge of a table. Pressure and tension, at the same instant, in the same spot. Squeeze it and stretch it. That is the combination that starves the blood, throttles the pump, and buckles the insulation all at once, and does it fast enough to skip the alarm. Weiss noticed something else, something that makes this culprit slippery. It comes back. The same person crosses their legs the same way for years, and it can happen again. And it can strike both legs, because most of us have a favorite side, but we are not loyal, and a person who does it to the right this week does it to the left next month. Two legs, two episodes, months apart, and a busy physician may never line them up as one habit. The crime hides by repeating itself. So that is the answer to the cold case on the floor. Not a stroke, not a mystery disease, not bad luck. His own weight, carried down through his own two bones, clamping and stretching the most exposed inch of the biggest nerve he owns, right where it wraps the head of the fibula, close enough to the skin that you can very nearly feel it there yourself. He did it to himself, sitting perfectly still, feeling nothing at all. Now stand up with him. That is the moment everybody knows, even if they have never once thought about why. You uncross, you get to your feet, and the leg answers with a strange, furious swarm. Pins and needles. 1,000 tiny prickles, sharp and bright, marching all over the skin. And here is the thing that surprises people. Those prickles are not the injury. Those prickles are the recovery. That is the sound of the nerve coming back to life, and it is not a quiet return. Think about what just happened down there. For 2 or 3 hours, the pressure held the little pumps in the axon membrane shut. Those pumps, the sodium and potassium machinery, cost energy to run, and they need blood to bring that energy. Squeeze off the blood, choke the pump, and the whole line goes silent fiber by fiber in whatever order the pressure decides. Now you release it. The blood floods back in, the pumps power up again, and the fibers wake up. But they do not wake up together, all holding hands in one polite chorus. They wake up ragged, each on its own schedule, like a whole street of alarm clocks going off a few seconds apart. The pain fibers tend to come back first, then the temperature fibers. Each type reactivates at its own moment, firing out of step with its neighbors, sending a scramble of signals up to the brain that make no coordinated sense at all. Your brain gets a message that says pain, and right beside it a message that says cold and another that says touch, all arriving in a jumble from skin that nothing is actually touching. And your brain does the only honest thing it can with that mess. It reports prickling. Needles. A fizzing carpet of sensation with no cause in the outside world, because the cause is entirely inside the wire. It is the switchboard flickering back on, every line lighting up at a slightly different second. That is why it feels alive, almost electric, and why it fades in a minute or two as the clocks finally fall into step. The tingling is the nerve clearing its throat. But here is where the detective has to ask one more question, the hard one. When it is over, is it really over? You shook out your leg, the prickling passed, you walked to the kitchen. For most of us, that is the whole story. But not for the man on the floor, and this is where the physics decides your sentence. Because there are two very different things that can happen inside that squeezed nerve, and from the outside they can look almost the same on the first day. In the milder one, the pressure only bruises the insulation. Remember the myelin, the fatty wrapping that lets the signal leap from gap to gap down the wire, jumping between those tiny bare spots called the nodes of Ranvier, each one only 2 or 3 millionths of a meter long, and the leaping is what makes a nerve fast, up to about 120 meters per second. Crush the nerve hard enough, and you deform that wrapping right at the gaps. You do not cut the wire. You just wreck the insulation so the signal can no longer jump. That is the mild injury. The doctors call it neuropraxia, and the good news buried in that ugly word is that insulation can be rebuilt. The body repairs the myelin, the jumping resumes, and you are usually whole again in about 3 months. Slow, but complete. The other possibility is uglier. Press harder or press longer, and you do not just dent the insulation. You kill the wire itself. The long thread of the axon, running down from high in the leg, dies back below the crush. Now there is no repairing a wrapping because there is no wire left under it to wrap. The nerve has to grow a new one, sprouting forward from the injury and creeping down toward the muscle it lost. And nerves grow at a crawl, roughly 1.5 to 3 millimeters a day. A millimeter or two. Do that arithmetic over the distance from your knee to the muscles that lift your foot, and you are talking about months and months, sometimes the better part of a year, up to 12 months of waiting while a thread inches its way back to work. Same habit, same fibula, same exposed inch of nerve. The only difference is how hard and how long you leaned on it, and that difference is the difference between a season and a year. Now the young man on the floor was lucky. He lost everything at first, 0 out of 5, the foot dead. But by 2 weeks he had climbed back to 3 out of 5, and by a month he was whole again. Full strength, full feeling, no surgery, just a brace to hold the foot up while the nerve healed. That fast a recovery tells you it was the mild kind. The insulation, not the wire. He got his warning, and he got away with it. And do not go thinking you have to sit cross-legged on a hard floor to earn this. The pressure is the villain, not the posture. Consider the people who cannot move at all, lying still in a hospital bed for weeks. About 1 in 10 of the patients who stay bedbound in intensive care for more than 4 weeks develop exactly this same perineal weakness, the same foot that will not lift. Nobody crossed their legs. Nobody stretched a thing. The mattress and their own bone did all of it, quietly over days. That is the proof of what the real culprit always was, not the crossing, the pressure. Sustained weight on the most exposed inch of the wire held long enough for the little pumps to starve. The leg cross is just the fastest, most ordinary way most of us ever managed to do it to ourselves. So that is the case, opened and closed. But let me leave you with one last thing, almost a joke. except it is completely true and it lives in the same simple act. Cross your legs at the knee, knee riding over knee, the way half the world sits in a waiting room. Now suppose someone wraps a cuff on your arm at that exact moment and measures your blood pressure. The number comes out high, not by a little rounding error. The top number, the systolic, climbs by something like 5 to 10 units of pressure, and the bottom number by a few as well, purely from the way you have folded your legs. Uncross them, or cross only at the ankle, foot over foot, and the effect vanishes. Ankle over ankle does nothing. It has to be knee on knee. And that one is not the nerve at all. That is a whole separate piece of plumbing. Crossing the big legs at the knee squeezes on the circulation and changes what the pressure gauge reads, and it has fooled doctors into thinking a patient runs high when the patient only sat wrong. Two completely different sciences, the electrical one in the nerve and the hydraulic one in the blood, and the same lazy afternoon posture reaches into both of them without you feeling a single thing. That is what I keep coming back to. You did not fall. Nobody hit you. There was no disease, no poison, no bad luck out of the sky. You sat still in a chair, the way you have sat 10,000 times, and inside your own leg the physics went right on working. Weight found bone, bone found the softest exposed thread of the largest nerve you own, the little pumps ran out of fuel, the jumping signal lost its footing at the gaps, and the whole line went dark, one fiber at a time, in an order set by nothing but the pressure. All of it silent, all of it invisible, all of it obeying rules that do not care in the slightest whether you are paying attention. And I think that is the real lesson hiding in a sleeping foot. The body is not a mystery box. It is a machine made of wires and pumps and pressures, running the same laws as everything else, right down there under the skin where you cannot see it. You just have to be curious enough to ask what your own crossed legs are quietly doing while you sit there feeling nothing, certain that nothing at all is going on.